little buddy. Okay, go on. Or you can sit on my shoulder. Come on. Okay. This is the 4th time I'm filming this video. So we're gonna get it right now. All right. Hi, I'm Cece. Welcome to my channel. I make videos sometimes. We did hit 1,000 subscribers. We're actually a little over 1,400 right now, which I feel kind of silly celebrating because I know that's not objectively like a lot, but it is kind of a cool milestone. We're also monetized, which is another cool milestone. Yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of excited. So thank you guys for watching and for all your support. So today I want to talk about the push we've seen in recent years towards more sustainable and ethical fashion, and how being a more ethical consumer of clothing may not be as black and white as it seems. I'm not an expert on this by any means, but I've been learning a lot and trying to really educate myself about this. And I do think it's something that's important to be educated about, even if you're not someone who's super into fashion. This is, hey, you have to get off my keyboard, little guy. You have to get off my keyboard. This is an area where we have the potential to have a positive or a negative impact. And so I think it's just important to educate ourselves and do the best we can. There you go. And I, for one, have been trying for a few years to be a more conscious, ethical consumer in all areas, but definitely in buying clothing. And it's honestly a little bit frustrating to try and figure out how to do that. It feels like one of those areas where you can't really win, so you have to choose the option that does the least harm, but then it can actually be kind of difficult to see what that even is. And I think in the past few years, people have definitely started to realize how bad fast fashion is. People are encouraging each other to stop buying clothes from fast fashion brands like H&M, Shein, Forever 21. The fast fashion industry contributes hugely to pollution, and a lot of fast fashion clothes are also made in factories where workers are overworked, underpaid, and working in very unsafe conditions. I think it's great to avoid fast fashion and just not support that industry if you realistically can. But I also think it's a little uncool to shame people for buying from fast fashion stores, because many people are doing that out of necessity because that's what they can afford. It's a privilege to be in a financial position where you can afford to spend a little bit more on clothing in order to buy from stores that source and produce their clothing ethically. I saw a TikTok recently that was kind of condemning fast fashion and talking about all the reasons that it's bad, all the things wrong with it. And this TikTok was basically saying, just shop at thrift stores instead. And someone else in the comments said, you know, I grew up really poor and we did always shop at thrift stores, but it also meant a lot to me to occasionally have something brand new, something that was just mine. And very often the only option for that my family can afford was a fast fashion store because they're so inexpensive. And I think this is an example of something we see a lot, and what I think is a really big mistake that we've made as a society, which is we put the onus on consumers to only support businesses that engage in ethical business practices, when the onus should really be on the companies to just run more ethical businesses in the first place, especially when it comes to fast fashion or maybe shopping from places like Amazon or Walmart that maybe don't have the highest ethical standards. Many people shopping at those places are doing so because it's all they can afford, and I just don't feel like it's right to shame them for doing so, nor do I feel like that is the answer. Nevertheless, this new wave of awareness about the bad practices of the fast fashion industry has driven a lot of people to thrift shopping as a more ethical and sustainable option. But of course, there are downsides to this too. One of them is that thrifting is definitely a trend now, and because of that, because there are more people thrifting, there are higher income people thrifting, thrift stores are becoming gentrified. This is unfortunately driving thrift store prices higher and higher. This results in thrift stores becoming increasingly unaffordable for low-income people who might really rely on them as a cheap option for clothing. I live in a suburb of Los Angeles, and there are a lot of really great thrift stores around me, but there is a neighborhood near mine that just had a Goodwill open. It's in a slightly upscale area, and I can see this in action there. That Goodwill is expensive. And by expensive, I mean, like, I've definitely seen shoes, jackets, purses there for $30, $40, $50, which is pretty expensive for a thrift store if you ask me. And I think it's definitely expensive enough to be outside of the price range of some lower income people who might rely on secondhand shopping. And this actually brings us to my next point, which is that Goodwill is actually kind of terrible. After some of the stuff I've read, I'm not really convinced that shopping at Goodwill and supporting them is any better than supporting a fast fashion company. If you didn't know, Goodwill employs disabled workers and brands themselves as a charity largely because of this. What they don't tell you is that they also exploit this unbelievable, archaic legal loophole that allows disabled workers to be paid less than minimum wage. So that means that some of Goodwill's employees are making as little as 22 cents an hour, while its executives are bringing home millions of dollars a year. They also regularly implement certain efficiency quotas for their workers to meet. So it might be something like you have to hang 100 pieces of clothing in half an hour. These arbitrary quotas are especially difficult for someone who might have a physical disability, which many of Goodwill's employees do. And if an employee does not meet this quota, their already low pay is docked even more. I don't know how this is legal, but apparently it is. So this really appears to be less about productivity and more of an excuse to pay their already low paid workers even less. Goodwill is a nonprofit, meaning they don't pay taxes. All of their merchandise is donated, so they don't pay anything for inventory, and they pay their employees less than minimum wage. So this company is bringing in a huge profit every year. However, despite being branded as a charity and having tax exempt status for that, less than 1/8 of their profit per year actually goes to any type of charity. There are also many stories of unsafe workplace practices that have resulted in their employees being injured or even as well as stories of the company retaliating against whistleblowers who have attempted to report these unsafe conditions. This is a serious civil rights issue, if you ask me, that deserves a lot more attention, and it's just horrific that disabled workers don't get the same rights or legal protection as the rest of us. But the fact is that Goodwill is a company that exploits and endangers its disabled workers, pays them cents on the dollar while its executives and shareholders rake in millions, fills landfills with clothing and unsold merchandise, and does it all under the guise of being a charity and a do-good organization. There's honestly even more. Let me know if you want a video just on Goodwill and how it's actually terrible and we've all just been duped into thinking it's an ethical company. But my point is that thrift shopping, buying clothes secondhand, is not an inherently more ethical option. So if fast fashion is out, thrifting is out, Goodwill is out, the next logical option would be to seek out ethical clothing brands such as Reformation or Everlane. But there are a few problems with this as well. The most obvious being that these brands tend to be pretty expensive, and it's just not realistic to expect everyone to be able to drop a couple $100s on a single dress or piece of clothing. Secondly, this branding of ethical fashion that these companies have is often nothing more than a marketing gimmick. For example, Everlane is a company that has built their entire brand on the concept of what they call radical transparency. This means being super transparent about the sourcing, production, manufacturing cost, and pricing of their clothes, or so they claim. Despite this, there's no evidence that they actually ensure a living wage for all of their workers. They also employ people in countries that have extremely high rates of labor abuse. Everlane also got a lot of criticism earlier this year for illegally firing 42 employees who attempted to unionize. This is obviously illegal. It's called union busting, and it is illegal because forming unions is one of the only ways that workers have to advocate for their own rights. Overall, just not a good look for a company that has based its entire brand on ethics and transparency. And to me, it kind of makes it seem like that's all more of a marketing gimmick than anything. So as consumers, this is a lot to take in, and it also kind of puts us in a bad spot. Like, we know that fast fashion is bad, but we also don't want to contribute to gentrifying thrift stores. But Goodwill is also terrible, but ethical brands are really expensive and they may not even be that ethical to begin with. So what the heck are we supposed to do to ensure that we are having a good impact, or at least minimizing any negative impact we might have? I don't think that all of this means we should just say it and give up and shop wherever. I do think that one of the most effective ways to affect change is to vote with our wallets, and I do think that individual choices matter and they add up and can make a difference. So there are a few things that I'm trying to do to be a more responsible consumer that I think the average person can do. If you're interested in doing that as well, maybe listen to this, take what works for you, ignore what doesn't work or doesn't apply. So first of all, I do think buying clothing from local thrift stores, if you live in a place that has them, is a really good option. You can support those instead of sporting supporting Goodwill. They're often small businesses or family owned. Their prices are much better in my experience, which is just kind of a perk. And then also if you're shopping at local small businesses, you're stimulating your local economy, not giving your money to Goodwill, which as we said is a sham of a charity. I already mentioned there is the problem of the gentrification of thrifting, and you're not going to be able to completely negate that effect, just like you're not going to be solely causing it. But I do think there are some things you can do, not to even minimize that effect necessarily, but just to be a more responsible thrift shopper. Firstly, you can donate clothes back to the thrift stores that you buy from. That way you're not just coming in and swooping up all the good stuff and just leaving crap for everyone else. I also think that the way you thrift shop is really important. Don't just buy stuff because it's inexpensive. Try to really be thoughtful with your purchases and only buy things that you really love and you know you'll really get use out of. There are also some more, I guess, upscale secondhand stores that pay for their merchandise and screen it a little more carefully. Crossroads Trading and Buffalo Exchange are two that we have on the West Coast. I really like these stores. They're still really good prices, but if you can afford to pay a little bit more for your secondhand clothes, and if you enjoy that kind of shopping experience, these are a great option. They have really great stuff, and that way you're not taking clothing away from the more traditional thrift stores and from people who might really rely on those low prices. There's also online thrift stores and resale sites like Mercari, Depop, ThredUp. There's honestly a ton of them now. I don't really see a downside to these. Hopefully there won't be some big scandal that comes out where we realize that they're actually terrible. But I know if you live in the US outside of a major or like mid-sized city, your town probably doesn't even have a thrift store besides a Goodwill. So I think that these are a great option also. Another thing to watch is the way in which you get rid of clothes. I know for most of my life, I have just like washed them and thrown them in a bag and taken them to Goodwill. Turns out a huge portion of Goodwill's donations and unsold merchandise actually end up in landfills. So I think that local thrift stores or charities are much better options for when you just want to get rid of clothes. I know a few charities in my area that donate clothes directly to unhoused people or to low-income people who need them, and I think that this is a better option for a couple reasons. First of all, people who need the clothes are getting them for free and no one is making a profit off of them. Two, I think people are much more likely to actually get use out of the clothes this way, whereas when you donate to Goodwill, a lot of them just end up in a landfill. If you do donate to Goodwill, because sometimes there's just not another good option, try to make sure the items you donate are clean and folded and in pretty good condition. Goodwill doesn't wash clothes, so if you bring in something that is dirty or wrinkled or just doesn't look appealing, it's probably just gonna get chucked in the landfill or the dumpster. Another thing I think that we all can and should do is just to buy clothes more consciously in general, no matter where you're shopping. This ties into the idea of slow fashion, but I think slow fashion is really often associated with being expensive, and it doesn't have to be. When I was younger, when I was a teenager, I would be really bad about buying things just because they were inexpensive. I would get something that I didn't even really like that much just because it was a really good deal, and then I would never wear it, and 6 months later I would just end up getting rid of it or donating it, and that was just dumb. It was just wasting my money, wasting the clothing, wasting the resources it took to make that clothing. It was just not helping anyone. And as I've gotten older, I have tried to be more conscious of having a cohesive wardrobe. When I buy clothes, I try to keep in mind what I have in my closet, what will go with this piece, will I realistically wear it and get enough wear out of it to justify buying it. When I'm shopping secondhand, I try to really pay attention to the quality of the pieces that I buy and pick out ones that I think will last me a while. I just kind of overall shifted to the mindset of having fewer pieces of clothing that I like more and that I will wear more. And it's been great. It saves me money. I'm not contributing to the cycle of pollution. Another thing I think is great is to learn some basic sewing skills. So that way you can mend or alter clothing that's either damaged or doesn't fit you quite right. And I do mean basic. I'm not a good sewer, but I think the very basics go a long way. I now try and fix my clothes that get a hole in them or something instead of just getting rid of them. But yeah, I think that ethical fashion and ethical consumerism in general is really complicated. It's difficult. None of us can do it perfectly. Sometimes you just have to order from Amazon. A while ago, my boyfriend needed a new laptop charger, and so we went first to a local electronics store. They didn't have it. We then went to Best Buy and they had it for like $70. And then while we were in Best Buy, we checked Amazon on our phones and they had it for $19 with free next day delivery. And that kind of thing is why I don't feel right about people shaming others who buy from companies that are maybe less than ethical. It's unfortunate that we have these corporations that engage in not super ethical practices and are just too big to fail. And it would be great if we could all support ethical companies or small businesses instead. But unfortunately, it's really difficult and really expensive and just not very realistic for most people to do that. No one's going to do it perfectly, and it's not necessarily their fault. So there's no sense in shaming someone for buying a shirt from Forever 21. I just think it's all about educating yourself and deciding what values are important to you and doing the best that you reasonably can. Yeah, anyway, that is it for me today. I hope that you found some of this useful and informative. If you liked this video, feel free to like and subscribe down below, and I will catch you in the next one. Little pals, what's up? Ah, don't step on his head. Oh. My sweet boys. Okay, ow. Hey, bud.